I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it.
Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities.
For weeks, tension built quietly behind palace walls, hidden beneath formal appearances and controlled public messaging. Then, without warning, everything shifted. A controversy linked to Queen Camilla triggered a response from Prince William that would, according to insiders, begin to reshape authority within the reign of King Charles III. The moment Prince William entered his father's residence, those present understood immediately that this was not a routine visit. Within the structured environment of the royal household, arrivals are typically coordinated, announced, and carefully managed. Protocol exists not only for tradition, but to maintain order and hierarchy. Yet on this occasion, Prince William moved past those expectations without hesitation, entering with a sense of urgency that drew attention before a single word had been spoken. Staff members who witnessed the moment later described a noticeable shift in atmosphere. It was not simply that the Prince of Wales had arrived unannounced, but that his demeanor carried a level of focus that signaled something far more serious. There were no formal greetings, no pauses for acknowledgement. His attention was fixed, directed entirely toward a situation that had been developing quietly but persistently over several weeks. At the center of that situation was a controversy that had begun to circulate beyond private circles and into public discussion. The issue, as described by individuals familiar with the matter, was not limited to a single event or accusation. It involved an association, one connected to a figure whose reputation had already drawn scrutiny and criticism. While the details of that association were not uniformly presented, the concern within the palace was not only about what had happened, but about what continued to happen despite growing awareness of the public response. According to accounts referenced in the source material, Queen Camilla had maintained a level of private contact with this individual even after the controversy became widely known. Messages, expressions of support, and suggestions of continued association contributed to a perception that the issue was not being addressed with the level of caution expected in such circumstances. To external observers, this created the impression that lessons from previous controversies within the monarchy had not been fully absorbed. When Prince William confronted Queen Camilla, the exchange that followed was shaped by two fundamentally different perspectives. From her standpoint, the relationship in question was not defined by scandal, but by history. It predated her role as queen, extending back to a time when public expectations and institutional pressures were very different. In that context, loyalty was not a strategic choice but a personal principle. She viewed the situation not as an endorsement of wrongdoing, but as a refusal to abandon someone based solely on shifting public opinion. This perspective was influenced, in part, by her own experiences. During earlier periods of her life, Queen Camilla had faced intense public criticism, often becoming a focal point for negative sentiment directed at the royal family. In those years, the support of individuals who remained loyal despite widespread backlash had played a significant role in her ability to endure that pressure. That history shaped her interpretation of the present moment. From her perspective, distancing herself from a long-standing connection during a period of controversy would have contradicted the very loyalty she had once depended upon. Prince William, however, approached the situation from an entirely different framework. For him, the issue was not defined by personal history, but by public perception and institutional responsibility. As the heir to the throne, his focus was on the long-term stability of the monarchy, an institution that relies heavily on public trust. In his view, continued association with a controversial figure during an active scandal was not a private matter. It was a signal, one that could be interpreted as tolerance or indifference toward behavior that had already been widely criticized. This difference in perspective transformed the conversation into something more than a disagreement about a single relationship. It became a broader conflict about the nature of the monarchy itself. Queen Camilla emphasized the human dimension of the institution, arguing that those within it should not be expected to abandon personal relationships at the first sign of public discomfort. Prince William emphasized the symbolic dimension, asserting that the monarchy's survival depends on maintaining a consistent and credible public image. As the discussion progressed, the gap between these positions became increasingly difficult to bridge. Each side viewed their stance as a form of protection, one protecting personal integrity, the other protecting institutional stability. Yet these forms of protection were not compatible. The more firmly each position was held, the more the conversation shifted from negotiation toward confrontation. The situation was further complicated by the role of King Charles III. At the time of the initial exchange, he was not present, but once informed, he found himself at the center of a conflict that extended beyond a single issue. This was not simply a question of addressing a controversy. It was a question of balancing competing loyalties, between his wife and his son, between personal relationships and institutional demands. For King Charles III, the challenge was not only to decide what action to take, but to understand the implications of each possible decision. Supporting Queen Camilla risked reinforcing the perception that the monarchy was unwilling to distance itself from controversy. Supporting Prince William risked undermining his own authority and potentially altering the internal balance of power within the royal family. Remaining neutral was not a sustainable option, as the situation had already begun to extend beyond private discussion. Within the palace, the effects of this tension became increasingly visible. Conversations that would normally remain confined to private channels began to influence broader dynamics. Staff members, attuned to shifts in tone and priority, recognized that the situation was evolving into something more significant than a routine disagreement. Informal alignments began to form, not through explicit declarations, but through subtle changes in communication and behavior. 3 days later, Prince William returned, and the nature of the situation changed. This time, the visit was not framed as a discussion, but as a decision point. According to the account provided, he presented a clear condition. All ties with individuals connected to the controversy must be severed, or the matter would be escalated beyond the confines of the palace. This marked a significant departure from traditional royal dynamics. The relationship between a reigning monarch and the heir has historically been defined by patience and gradual transition. The heir prepares, advises, and observes, but does not impose. By presenting a direct ultimatum, Prince William stepped beyond that conventional boundary, introducing a new level of assertiveness into the internal structure of the monarchy. In that moment, the issue could no longer be understood solely as a response to a controversy. It had evolved into a broader question of authority, influence, and the future direction of the institution. The focus shifted from what had happened to who would decide how to respond, and under what terms. And as those within the palace observed the unfolding situation, one reality became increasingly difficult to ignore. The monarchy, long defined by clearly established roles and carefully maintained boundaries, was entering a period in which those boundaries were no longer as fixed as they had once been. The structure that has governed the British monarchy for generations has always depended on clarity of roles. The sovereign rules, and the heir prepares. It is a system designed to ensure continuity, stability, and a controlled transfer of authority over time. Within that structure, even during moments of crisis, there are expectations that remain largely unbroken. The heir may advise, may influence privately, but does not step beyond the boundary that separates preparation from power. What makes the current situation so significant is that, according to the account provided, Prince William did not remain within that boundary. Instead, he moved forward at a moment when the institution was already under pressure, and in doing so, he introduced a dynamic that the modern monarchy has rarely had to confront directly. Those familiar with royal tradition were not necessarily surprised that Prince William held strong views on how the situation should be handled. As heir to the throne, his long-term responsibility is to protect the institution he will eventually lead. What was unexpected, however, was the method he chose. By issuing a direct condition, cut all ties connected to the controversy or face escalation, he shifted the interaction from internal consultation to something closer to internal challenge. In historical terms, this is a delicate distinction. The monarchy depends not only on public legitimacy but also on internal discipline. The balance between monarch and heir has traditionally been maintained through restraint on both sides. When that restraint is altered, even slightly, it introduces uncertainty into a system that relies heavily on predictability. Timing played a critical role in how this situation unfolded. Behind public appearances, King Charles III was navigating increasing pressure, both personal and institutional. His schedule, while outwardly consistent, had become more difficult to sustain, and those closest to him were aware of the strain created by ongoing health concerns and the cumulative weight of public scrutiny. Prince William's decision to act at this particular moment was not incidental. According to the narrative, he recognized that prolonged indecision could deepen the impact of the controversy and further erode public confidence. By moving decisively, He created a situation in which delay was no longer viable. The issue had to be addressed, and it had to be addressed quickly. Inside the palace, reactions to this approach were not uniform. Some viewed it as necessary. From this perspective, the monarchy was facing a convergence of challenges: controversy, declining trust, and heightened media scrutiny. In such an environment, decisive action could be interpreted not as overreach, but as responsibility. Prince William, in this view, was acting in alignment with the long-term interests of the institution, even if it required stepping beyond traditional expectations. Others, however, saw a different risk. For them, the concern was not limited to the immediate issue, but extended to the precedent being set. If an heir could assert influence in this manner once, it raised the question of whether similar actions could occur again under different circumstances. The monarchy's strength lies in its structure, and any shift within that structure, however justified in the moment, has the potential to alter future expectations. This divergence in interpretation contributed to a growing sense of tension within the royal household. It was not expressed openly, but it was understood. Conversations became more measured, decisions more carefully observed. The issue at hand was no longer confined to a single controversy. It had become a test of how authority would be exercised and by whom. At the center of this tension remained Queen Camilla. Her position made the situation particularly complex, because it connected the institutional challenge directly to the personal sphere of the monarch. Any decision regarding her actions would inevitably carry implications beyond the immediate issue, affecting both internal relationships and public perception. For Prince William, this complexity did not alter the core of his argument. His position, as described in the source material, was grounded in consistency. The monarchy could not afford mixed signals. If it sought to maintain public trust, its response to controversy had to be clear, unified, and unambiguous. Partial measures, in his view, would only prolong uncertainty and invite further scrutiny. This approach reflects a broader shift in how the monarchy operates within a modern media environment. In earlier eras, internal matters could remain largely contained. Today, the distinction between private and public is far less stable. Information moves quickly, and perception can change rapidly. In such a context, the margin for ambiguity becomes increasingly narrow. As pressure continued to build, the situation began to affect not only decision-making but also internal dynamics. Staff members, advisors, and those involved in daily operations adjusted their expectations based on emerging patterns. They observed where discussions were leading, where authority appeared to be consolidating, and how priorities were being redefined in real time. What made this period particularly significant was the absence of any formal declaration. There was no announcement indicating a change in authority, no official statement redefining roles. Yet despite this, a shift was becoming perceptible. Decisions that would traditionally pass through the office of the monarch increasingly reflected the influence of the heir. Processes adapted, not through directive, but through necessity. This kind of transition is difficult to measure precisely because it does not occur at a single identifiable moment. It unfolds gradually, shaped by circumstance, response, and adaptation. One decision leads to another, one adjustment reinforces the next, until the cumulative effect becomes visible. For King Charles III, this created a situation in which every available option carried consequence. To resist Prince William's position risked prolonging the controversy and amplifying its impact. To accept it, however, meant acknowledging a level of influence that extended beyond traditional expectations for an heir. Neither path preserved the existing balance unchanged. What becomes clear in this context is that the issue was never solely about the controversy itself. It was about how the monarchy responds under pressure. As the internal pressure continued to build, the situation moved beyond disagreement and into something far more consequential, a decision that could not be delayed. For King Charles III, the challenge was no longer theoretical. It had become immediate, personal, and institutional all at once. The controversy had not faded, public scrutiny had intensified, and Prince William had made it clear that inaction was no longer acceptable. For several weeks, King Charles III had attempted to manage the situation without forcing a definitive outcome. This approach reflected both his instinct for balance and his long-standing preference for measured responses. Historically, the monarchy has relied on patience, allowing time to absorb pressure and reduce volatility. But in this case, time did not provide resolution. Instead, it amplified the issue. Public attention remained fixed, criticism grew more persistent, and internal divisions became more difficult to contain. At the center of this moment stood Queen Camilla. Her position made the situation uniquely complex, because it linked the controversy directly to the personal life of the monarch. Any decision involving her would not only address the external issue, but also redefine internal relationships at the highest level of the royal family. According to the account provided, Queen Camilla became aware of the shift before it was formally expressed. In private conversations, subtle changes in tone began to emerge. Where there had once been certainty, there was now hesitation. Where there had been clear support, there was now careful phrasing. These changes, though not publicly visible, signaled that the balance within the situation was beginning to move. For King Charles III, the dilemma was rooted in competing responsibilities. On one side was his role as husband, shaped by years of shared experience and personal commitment. On the other was his role as monarch, defined by the need to protect the institution above all else. These roles are not always in conflict, but in this instance, they were pulling in different directions. Prince William's position added a further layer of complexity. His argument, as described in the source material, was not framed in personal terms but in institutional ones. He presented the situation as a matter of risk management, emphasizing how continued association with controversy could undermine public trust and weaken the monarchy's standing. His approach was structured, forward-looking, and difficult to dismiss, particularly in a climate where perception plays a critical role. The turning point came during a private meeting in which King Charles III moved from consideration to decision. According to the account, he presented the outcome as something shaped by circumstance rather than choice. This distinction is important, because it reflects the nature of the pressure he was facing. While, in principle, he retained full constitutional authority to reject Prince William's position, the practical realities of the situation made that authority increasingly difficult to exercise. Several factors contributed to this constraint. The ongoing scrutiny surrounding the controversy had created a sense of urgency. Public confidence, already under strain, was at risk of further decline. At the same time, Prince William's willingness to escalate the matter introduced the possibility that the issue could move beyond private resolution into a more visible and potentially damaging form of exposure. In this environment, the distinction between power and leverage became significant. King Charles III held formal authority, but Prince William held a different kind of influence: the ability to shape how the situation would be perceived if it were not resolved. This imbalance altered the dynamics of the decision-making process. Authority remained with the monarch, but pressure reshaped how that authority could be used. For Queen Camilla, the outcome was both understandable and difficult. From a structural perspective, the decision aligned with the need to stabilize the institution. From a personal perspective, it represented a shift in support at a moment when loyalty had been central to her position. The contrast between these perspectives underscores the broader tension between personal relationships and institutional priorities. What followed was not a formal announcement, but a series of adjustments that gradually redefined how decisions were made. King Charles III began to step back from certain areas of direct involvement, particularly those related to strategy and crisis management. This was not presented as a withdrawal of authority, but it had the effect of redistributing influence within the palace. Prince William, in turn, moved into a more active role. Initially, this involved participation in discussions that would traditionally fall within the monarch's domain. Over time, however, his involvement expanded beyond consultation. He began to shape outcomes, guide responses, and influence the direction of key decisions. The transition was gradual, but its cumulative effect became increasingly clear. Within the palace, these changes were quickly recognized. Advisors adjusted their communication patterns, directing information and recommendations in ways that reflected the evolving structure. Staff members, accustomed to interpreting subtle shifts in authority, responded accordingly. No formal directive was required. The system adapted to the new reality through observation and response. For Queen Camilla, the impact of this shift became evident in a different way. As decisions moved through new channels, her involvement in those decisions began to decrease. Conversations that once included her perspective continued without it. Processes that had previously engaged her role evolved into structures in which her input was no longer central. This change was not immediate, but it was consistent. King Charles III, according to the narrative, viewed these developments as temporary, an adjustment made necessary by a specific set of circumstances. However, those within the palace who observed the pattern more closely understood that such shifts rarely reverse once established. Authority, once redistributed in practice, tends to remain where it has proven effective. Prince William's increasing role was reinforced by outcomes. His approach to managing the situation was perceived as decisive and aligned with the need for clarity. In a period defined by uncertainty, decisiveness carries its own form of legitimacy. As his influence produced results, it strengthened the position he had already begun to occupy. Over time, this created a new equilibrium within the monarchy. King Charles III remained the sovereign, retaining the formal authority of his position. How it defines authority in moments of uncertainty, and how it adapts when established structures are tested by new conditions. As these dynamics continued to evolve, one reality began to emerge with increasing clarity. The monarchy was not undergoing a sudden transformation, but a gradual recalibration. Authority was not being transferred in a formal sense, but it was being exercised differently, shaped by the demands of the moment and the individuals involved. And within that recalibration, the role of the heir was no longer confined to observation and preparation. It had expanded into something more active, more immediate, and more consequential, raising a question that would continue to grow in significance as events progressed. What happens when the line between preparation and power begins to blur, not through declaration, but through action? As this new balance of influence began to settle within the palace, the most striking aspect was not how quickly it happened, but how quietly it was accepted. There was no formal declaration, no constitutional adjustment, and no public acknowledgement that anything had changed. Yet behind the scenes, according to the account provided, the distribution of authority was no longer what it had been even a few weeks earlier. What emerged instead was a system that continued to appear unchanged from the outside, while operating differently within. King Charles III remained the sovereign in title, continuing to perform the ceremonial and symbolic duties associated with the crown. Public engagements, official appearances, and state functions still reflected continuity. But in the internal processes that shaped decisions, a different pattern had begun to take hold. Prince William increasingly became the central point through which key matters were filtered. Early each day, he was reported to review briefings, assess developments, and engage with advisors on issues that extended beyond the traditional scope of an heir's responsibilities. These were not isolated instances of support or temporary delegation. They represented a consistent involvement in areas that had historically been reserved for the reigning monarch. For palace staff, the shift was subtle but unmistakable. In an environment where hierarchy is clearly defined, even small changes in communication patterns carry meaning. Documents that would previously require direct approval from the king began to move through Prince William's office. Recommendations were framed with his perspective in mind. Decisions, once delayed for formal confirmation, were increasingly finalized through his direction. This adaptation did not occur through instruction, but through recognition. Those working within the system understood that efficiency and clarity had become priorities, particularly in the context of ongoing scrutiny. If one figure was consistently providing direction and resolution, the system would naturally begin to orient itself around that figure. Over time, this created a feedback loop in which authority was reinforced not by declaration, but by use. Externally, the change began to reflect in more visible ways. Public engagements that might traditionally feature the monarch as the primary representative increasingly placed Prince William at the forefront. Speeches, appearances, and high-profile responsibilities shifted in emphasis, with the heir assuming a more prominent role in communicating the monarchy's position. In parallel, Catherine, Princess of Wales, also became more visible in key engagements, reinforcing the sense that the future of the monarchy was not only approaching, but actively shaping the present. Their combined presence presented an image of continuity and readiness, one that resonated with both domestic and international audiences. This outward visibility was matched by internal restructuring. Advisors who had long operated within established frameworks began to adjust their roles. Some aligned more closely with Prince William's approach, while others found their influence gradually reduced. This was not necessarily the result of direct replacement, but of evolving priorities. As decision-making pathways changed, so too did the relevance of different voices within those pathways. Financial and operational decisions also reflected this transition. budget allocations, staffing considerations, and strategic planning increasingly fell under Prince William's influence. In institutional terms, control over resources often defines practical authority. As these areas shifted, they reinforced the broader movement of influence within the palace. At the same time, King Charles III's role began to evolve. He remained present in discussions, but the nature of that presence changed. Rather than initiating decisions, he was more frequently involved in reviewing and affirming outcomes that had already been shaped through prior consultation. This distinction is subtle, but significant. It marks the difference between directing a process and participating in it. For Queen Camilla, the consequences of this evolving structure were particularly noticeable. As influence consolidated elsewhere, her involvement in decision-making diminished. This was not accompanied by any formal statement or explicit exclusion. Instead, it occurred through the gradual redirection of discussions and the redefinition of who was considered central to those discussions. Over time, this created a sense of distance. Decisions continued to be made, but without the level of engagement that had previously defined her role. The change was incremental, but its cumulative effect was substantial. It altered not only the dynamics of governance within the palace, but also the personal relationships that intersected with those dynamics. What makes this period particularly noteworthy is that it unfolded without visible disruption. From the perspective of the public, the monarchy continued to function as expected. Ceremonies proceeded, engagements were fulfilled, and official statements maintained a consistent tone. There was no indication that the internal structure of authority had been adjusted. Yet internally, the reality was more complex. Authority had not been transferred in a formal sense, but it had been redistributed in practice. The distinction between the holder of power and the executor of power became less clear, shaped by circumstance rather than defined by tradition. This kind of transition is not without historical precedent, but its modern context introduces new dimensions. In earlier periods, such shifts could occur with limited public awareness. Today, however, even subtle changes can be observed, interpreted, and amplified. The monarchy operates within a global environment where perception is immediate and continuous. Prince William's approach, as described in the source material, emphasized decisiveness and consistency. In a period of uncertainty, these qualities contributed to the effectiveness of his expanding role. Each successful decision reinforced the legitimacy of his involvement, creating a cycle in which influence and outcome became mutually reinforcing. For King Charles III, the decision not to resist this evolution can be understood as a strategic choice. By allowing the system to adapt, he ensured continuity without confrontation. However, the exercise of that authority became more distributed, with Prince William playing a central role in areas that had previously been the exclusive domain of the monarch. This distinction between title and function is critical. The crown remained unchanged in its legal definition, but its operation adapted to the circumstances it faced. Power was not transferred through ceremony or declaration, but through necessity and response. And it is here that the deeper implication begins to emerge. The decision that King Charles III faced was not simply about resolving a controversy or managing a moment of crisis. It was about how the monarchy would function under pressure, and how its internal structure would respond when traditional boundaries were tested. By choosing to prioritize institutional stability, he preserved the continuity of the crown. But in doing so, he also allowed a new dynamic to take hold, one in which the distinction between monarch and heir became less rigid, shaped not by formal change, but by the practical realities of leadership. As this new dynamic settled into place, one question remained unresolved, growing more significant with each passing development. If authority can shift without announcement, guided by circumstance rather than tradition, then where, ultimately, does control within the monarchy truly reside? As this quiet redistribution of authority became more established, the question that naturally followed was whether such a shift had precedent, or whether the monarchy was entering entirely uncharted territory. Because while the current situation appears unusual, history suggests that moments like this, where power and title begin to separate, have occurred before, though rarely under the level of scrutiny that exists today. To understand the significance of what is unfolding, it is necessary to look beyond the present and examine how similar dynamics have played out in earlier periods. One of the most well-documented examples can be found during the later years of King George III. As his health deteriorated, his ability to govern became increasingly limited. In response, his son, George IV, assumed the role of Prince Regent, effectively carrying out the functions of the monarchy while his father remained king in title. This arrangement did not represent a formal removal of power from the sovereign. King George III retained his position, and the structure of the monarchy remained intact. However, in practical terms, decision-making authority had shifted. The heir was no longer preparing to rule at some future point. He was already exercising many of the responsibilities associated with the crown. The distinction between monarch and heir, while still legally defined, became less meaningful in daily governance. A different, though related, pattern can be observed during the later years of Queen Victoria. Following the death of Prince Albert, Queen Victoria withdrew from much of public life. Although she continued to reign, her son, Edward VII, began to assume a more visible and active role in representing the monarchy. He engaged in diplomatic functions, public appearances, and responsibilities that extended beyond the traditional expectations of an heir. In this case, the shift was not driven by formal incapacity, but by circumstance and adaptation. The monarchy responded to changing conditions by allowing the heir to step forward in ways that supported continuity. Again, the title remained unchanged, but the distribution of responsibility evolved. More recently, a similar dynamic could be observed during the final years of Queen Elizabeth II. As age began to limit her public engagements, King Charles III, then the Prince of Wales, took on an expanded role. He represented the crown at key events, managed increasing responsibilities, and became a central figure in maintaining the monarchy's public presence. What unites these examples is not identical circumstance, but a shared principle. When the demands placed upon the monarchy exceed the capacity of a single individual, the system adapts. The heir steps forward, not through confrontation, but through necessity. Authority, in such cases, is not transferred by decree, but redistributed through function. However, the current situation introduces an additional layer of complexity. Unlike historical transitions driven primarily by health or absence, this shift is occurring in the context of active internal disagreement and heightened public scrutiny. The presence of controversy, combined with the immediacy of modern media, accelerates the pace at which such changes unfold and increases the visibility of their consequences. In this environment, the role of Prince William appears to reflect both continuity and departure. On one hand, his increasing involvement aligns with historical patterns in which heirs assume greater responsibility during periods of strain. On the other hand, the manner in which this involvement has been asserted, through direct intervention and decisive positioning, introduces a more active form of influence than has typically been observed in recent decades. For King Charles III, the outcome of this process represents a balance between preservation and concession. By allowing the system to adapt, he ensures that the monarchy continues to function effectively under pressure. Yet in doing so, he also accepts a redefinition of how authority is exercised within his own reign. The crown remains with him, but the execution of its responsibilities becomes increasingly shared. For Queen Camilla, the historical perspective offers less reassurance. While past transitions have often focused on the relationship between monarch and heir, her position places her at the intersection of personal and institutional change. As influence shifts and roles are redefined, her place within the evolving structure becomes less certain, shaped by dynamics that extend beyond her control. What emerges from this comparison is a clearer understanding of the monarchy as a flexible institution, one capable of adapting to circumstances while maintaining its outward form. Titles, ceremonies, and traditions provide continuity, but the operation of power within that framework is more fluid than it may appear. And this is where the present moment becomes particularly significant. The shift that is taking place is not marked by a single event or announcement. It is the result of accumulated decisions, responses to pressure, and adjustments to changing conditions. It is gradual, but it is also consequential. Because when authority begins to move without formal recognition, it challenges the conventional markers by which power is understood. The question is no longer simply who holds the crown, but who directs its function, who shapes its response, and who determines its future course. As this process continues, the monarchy stands at a point of transition that is both familiar and unprecedented. Familiar in the sense that history has seen similar redistributions of responsibility, unprecedented in the speed and visibility with which it is occurring. And that leaves one final question, one that extends beyond any single controversy or individual decision. If the crown can adapt in this way, quietly and without declaration, then what does that say about where its true strength lies? In the title itself, or in the ability of those within it to redefine how it is used? If you found this analysis valuable, consider subscribing for more in-depth breakdowns of royal dynamics, institutional power, and the stories shaping public perception. Share your perspective in the comments. Do you see this as a necessary evolution to protect the monarchy, or a shift that could redefine it in ways we are only beginning to understand? The alternative, a visible assertion of authority in opposition to the emerging structure, could have introduced instability at a time when stability was essential. And so, the monarchy entered a phase in which its outward form remained unchanged, while its internal operation adapted to new realities. The crown continued to symbolize continuity, but the mechanisms through which that continuity was maintained had shifted. As this quiet transformation became embedded within the institution, a broader question began to take shape. If authority can move in practice while remaining static in principle, then the traditional markers of power, title, position, and formal role, no longer provide a complete picture. What matters instead is where decisions are made, how they are implemented, and who ultimately shapes their direction. And in this evolving landscape, the answer to those questions was becoming increasingly clear, even if it was never formally stated.